Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
Hello all, and welcome to Blondes and Bombshells Class 14, The Return to Heroism. I'm your host, Professor Saporin, here to guide you through our final class of this semester, taking a look at where we are now, how we got here, and where we're hopefully going. But first, before I do that, your attendance assignment for today is to go to the link that I sent to your email and fill out the online course evaluation. Yes, just be aware that when you do so, the only person who gets to read the comments that you can leave towards the end is me. That doesn't go to like some third party that's like evaluating me. That just goes directly to me. So don't write anything about me that you wouldn't want me to be reading. But please do, however, write, anything that, you think would be helpful, like suggestions for how to improve the course or what you thought or anything like that. Now, you may realize, of course, that these course evaluations are anonymous, which they are, so I'm going to ask you to email me as soon as you're done taking the evaluation and tell me the gist of one of the questions that you remember from it so I can make sure that you actually did it. Could be any question. All I need is the rough gist of it, so I know that you took the course evaluation, as it is mandatory as your attendance assignment for this evening. Okay, got it? So pause the video and go do that now. Okay, you did it? Good. So for now, I would like to start by going over the responses to the question that I asked you all last week, whether or not you personally enjoy sex scenes in movies. The results are in, so let's take a look. Interestingly, in spite of a small handful of brave admissions of enjoying sex scenes coming, to my surprise, mainly from female students, good for you. I salute you for defying the patriarchy and having the boldness and autonomy to express your preferences and desires and declare what you like. Nonetheless, the vast majority of students of both genders in this class overwhelmingly expressed genuine and great dislike and discomfort with sex scenes in movies. A very large number of students' comments centered around the awkwardness of viewing unexpected sex scenes popping up in movies while they were watching with their parents especially, but also other family members, and just even feelings of similar awkwardness in a theatrical audience, even with strangers watching sex scenes together in public. Obviously I think that this makes a lot of sense to feel weird about, and we'll talk about why a little later. I think, it makes a lot of sense that a lot of you reported being much more comfortable with watching sex scenes in movies when alone, and that the majority of respondents in this class said that they were a lot more okay with a film having sex scenes if it was motivated, like if the film was a romance drama or something of that ilk, rather than, an action movie or something totally unrelated that forced a sex scene in unnaturally in a way that distracted from the plot. So this brings me to an interesting point. As we've discussed in a previous class, Hollywood filmmakers often seem to make films without a lot of thought to the on-the-ground realities of the viewers, as with the number of graphically depicted rape scenes in the average Hollywood film when compared with the relatively high likelihood that the average film viewing audience will, statistically speaking, probably contain a fair number of rape victims, raising the question of exactly who these movies are for, as we discussed in a previous lesson. Obviously, this is a case of rank insensitivity. This seems to resonate, interestingly, with the overabundance of unnecessary surprise sex scenes that this class overwhelmingly complained about happening in movies whose plots are unrelated to sex or romance. Filmmakers seem to insert these surprise sex scenes without a thought to the very real fact that a significant number of their viewers will be watching these films with parents and or family members, either in theaters or at home, will be in public, which is honestly a very common, very normal way of viewing films, especially for the main Hollywood target demographic of teenage boys. Teenagers often go to see movies with their parents or often watch movies with their parents at home. So this kind of shows that this practice of surprise sex scenes is kind of odd, considering how common it is when you stop and think about it. One possible explanation that occurs to me is the fact that these days most films are directed by men over 40, and hence men who belong to a pre-internet generation of adolescent males who came of age during the tail end of the era of the theatrical exhibition of pornography. Your generation is lucky. You guys grew up with the internet and hence the ability to watch motion picture pornographic films in private during your adolescence, a relatively new advent with home computer and internet technology. In the past, prior to the late 1990s, pornography was exhibited in public like any theatrical film, and if you wanted to see a porno, the only way to do it was either to go to a porn theater and watch it in public, or, after the 1970s, to splurge on an expensive VCR to play VHS tapes and rent a pornographic film on VHS tape from the local video rental store. Of course, VCRs were very expensive throughout the 70s and 80s, becoming more affordable to the average person in the late 80s through the 90s. And of course, in the case of video rentals, you would be taking a pornographic VHS tape up to the register and interacting with a real human being who could see your selection. You would have to interact with them to pay for your rentals. So you can thank the internet for the very possibility of watching porn in private and anonymously without the knowledge of a cashier at the video store or a ticket seller at a theater or the rest of the audience who was with you. Understand that this is a relatively new phenomenon, and with the, understanding that most male film directors active today grew up in a world before this was possible, and perhaps we can better understand why, therefore, there are so many surprise sex scenes inserted into films. Maybe I think it's at least fair to say that these types of surprise scenes are likely created from a generational perspective more likely to accept the idea of viewing sexual content in public, or at least having a video store employee know of your plans to do so, and hence perhaps these scenes come off as far more anomalous and displeasing than they are meant to people of the younger generation who are used to the idea of being able to view sexual content in private and anonymously. At least that's my best guess for now. Personally, speaking for myself, I have never been to a porn theater, nor have I ever rented a porno on VHS. I'm not actually much of a porn person, so I'm in the same boat as many of you are when it comes to thinking that this idea of viewing porn in public or with a cashier's knowledge is very odd and something that I would be very uncomfortable with myself. Incidentally, while we're on this topic, I should probably mention that theatrical porn exhibition dates back to the silent era, starting with men-only exhibitions of stag films. You've probably heard the expression going stag, meaning like to go originally in an all-male group. Now it just means like a same-gender group, but it originates from the hunting expression, a lone male deer or a stag. And these screenings, these stag shows, often took the form of makeshift tents set up on the outskirts of the town, a kind of informal pornographic filmic exhibition that, of course, took place in public, albeit generally to male-only audiences, stag audiences. Anyway, back to most people's apparent discomfort with the amount of sex scenes, particularly unexpected and irrelevant sex scenes that spring up while watching films, especially with parents and family members. A few students raised particularly interesting comparisons with other media from other cultures, particularly European film, Korean TV romance dramas, and Arabic Egyptian feature films. The student who brought up European film discussed the relatively more artistic and nuanced approach these films tend to have when depicting sex scenes, while the other two students discussed the relatively more conservative cultural approaches of Korean TV dramas and Arabic Egyptian films, to the point where these films and TV shows do not even show kissing for the most part, implying sexual or romantic interludes through either subtle expressions of acting or off-screen implication. Interestingly, the student who brought up Korean TV dramas actually suggested that they leave you wanting more, an interesting antithesis to how most people in this class seem to feel about sex scenes in Hollywood films, which overwhelmingly seem to have left people wanting less. As I said to the student in my response, I find this particularly intriguing in terms of the difference in age and gender of the intended target demographics of these two types of media. Hollywood films are, of course, meant for teenage boys and seem to contain a disproportionate amount of gratuitous, overly obvious sexual content, while Korean romance dramas are meant for adult women and are therefore more subtle, more adept at teasing audiences, and more skillful at leading them on for an extended period of time, sometimes, according to this student, an entire season, before giving them a scene where the actors so much as kiss. The difference seems to me very much in line with the biological difference in libidinal preferences between teenage boys and adult women. One prefers, shall we say, instant gratification, while the other prefers subtle, skillful seduction that lasts a long time and makes the eventual gratification more earned, if you will. Anyway, as usual, great answers all, fabulous food for thought, and a very helpful informational statistical study on the topic of the reception of sex scenes in films, generational as well as technological influences on our culture, and differences between intended target demographics for different media produced by different cultures, between different intended audiences at different times. Great stuff, and thank you all for your participation. And just in case you're curious about my particular preferences when it comes to sex scenes in movies, I'm an old lady, and this is about as fast as I go.
Mary?
Certainly. Wrigley's up there fixing it with the captain right now, and in a few minutes you're going to be the uncertain Mrs. James Trevor.
But don't you think I'm very bad?
I'll tell you a little secret. I'm pretty bad myself.
The captain says he'll marry you in 15 minutes. Oh. I'll try and hurry him up, sir.
I'm also famous for groaning out loud and making fun of sex scenes when they, appear unexpectedly in films that I'm watching with my husband or other family members. And of course, for the one time that I forgot that I wasn't at home watching a film in private, this one instance when I was watching The Night of the Living Dead for the first time at the Anthology Film Archives in New York City, and that scene where the one random naked, of course, female zombie, the gender nudity bias, the one naked female zombie appeared on screen, and just I thoughtlessly blurted out, "What the hell is that?" Apparently to the great amusement of the theater audience, which suddenly reminded me that I wasn't at home by their cascading laughter. So, anyway, onward to greater things. As promised, we will be discussing the present era of filmmaking, but since we left off last week with children's television in the 1990s and early 2000s, I think it's only fair to bridge the gap and talk about how we got from there to here and where we are today. We left off talking about the rather pro-social influence of the show My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic, but I feel I would be remiss if I didn't address the, shall we say, less successfully pro-social depiction in its sister series, Equestria Girls, from 2013. Let's take a look at that show right now.
I am excited, but I'm a little nervous too. Twilight!
You'll soon know more about this place than even I do.
What am I?
You okay?
You must be new here.
My magic isn't working. My name's Twilight Sparkle and Pinkie Pie? You're officially up for the coveted Princess of the Fall Formal Crown.
Where is this Twilight Sparkle?
I'm so nervous, I know!
You do realize that's not a real word, right?
Hashtag perfect on the first try. Science. Party time! Time to fly! Hey, dolls! That's what we're calling darlings now. It's all part of our new slanguage we're calling sweet breves. Everything's cooler when you abbreviate it. N. Totes! That's an abbrev. As in, I totes have no idea what you just said. That is the power of breves. P to the brave.
I'm gonna hide in Pinkie's locker and scare her when she...
Okay. Try again.
Vanilla swirl. Chocolate crunch. Strawberry coconut. Lemon drop. Key lime. Orange creamsicle. Raspberry ganache. Won't stop till I seize the day. My wheels keep turning.
Oh, apple fudge.
So as you can see, Equestria Girls is a kind of alternate universe spin-off of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, in which the ponies have been transformed into human girls who, for some reason, are in high school despite seeming to be independent adults in the original pony series. Equestria Girls came out rather abruptly after the success of the Monster High series and especially Toyline, and seems very much to have been pushed by Hasbro as a means of competing in the human form high school fashion doll world through the already popular established brand of My Little Pony, selling twice the toys by double dipping into both the market of pony toys and humanoid high school fashion dolls simultaneously on toy store shelves. Equestria Girls has received a lot of criticism, I personally think very well-placed criticism, for things like trying too hard, cashing in just to sell dolls, the highly controversial, anorexic, much more sexualized looking characters, the illogical and somewhat regressive high school setting, the romance plot, depictions of normalized bullying, heavy messages of conformism, social status through toxic popularity and belonging to cliques, and so on. All kinds of things that were not in the original My Little Pony series. Ultimately, a large number of parents have complained that this series sends more negative messages and less positive messages to children, particularly to little girls, than the original series did, despite these being supposedly the same characters, just in an alternate world. I find it interesting how much this show just lost its emotionally empowering progressivism when it transformed its protagonists into female humans rather than the relatively more gender-neutral looking but female-coded cartoon ponies. It's certainly a striking difference from what we saw in the Friendship is Magic clip from last week.
The spirits of these 5 ponies got us through every challenge you threw at us.
Perhaps more troubling, as we have discussed, is that even today, G-rated animated films disproportionately emphasize male characters and have more of a preponderance of unrealistic, hypersexualized, hyper-thin, anorexic-looking female body types than live-action films. This also manifests itself in toy lines based on children's series, especially when we look at Equestria Girls. A toy line that was notoriously anorexic looking, inspired a lot of parental complaints, and which was actually later changed with the release of a new line of chunkier looking Equestria Girls dolls to better suit the requests of parents for a less anorexic looking toy line for their young daughters to attach themselves to. After all, as we learned from Judith Van Evera, what shows a child consumes and naturally what related toys they engage with in play outside of viewing time can further affect child development through imaginative play and continued psychological interaction with the brand. Here's a quote from the Wikipedia article subsection on the reception of Equestria Girls by parents. The quote says, "There has been criticism over the anthropomorphism approach of the toy line as well as the franchise overall. Prior to the Equestria Girls films, the Equestria Girls film's release, several mothers spoke to the New York Daily News stating concerns about the humanized characters, describing them as too sexy, anorexic, going back to the original Barbie, or looking like Bratz dolls, and several feared allowing their children to be influenced by the looks. However," the quote continues, "some considered it reasonable with other current media such as The Little Mermaid, with one parent stating she felt that it isn't any worse than Ariel in a bikini top for 2 hours. That's the end of the quote. Of course, as my husband pointed out, the film is less than 2 hours long, and Ariel spends significantly less than even the majority of the runtime in the bikini top. When she turns human relatively early on, she, wears clothes. Anyway, I would also point out that just because something has a historical precedent doesn't necessarily mean that it's therefore okay. A regressive portrayal is a regressive portrayal, and that fact won't simply go away just because some other kid's cartoon did it first. If anything, I'd say this situation only reinforces an existing negative message to little girls that over-sexualizes female characters targeting female children. Personally, I'm not convinced that having Ariel in a bikini top was really necessarily the most progressive thing in the world in the first place, and using a questionable portrayal in a Disney film from over 30 years ago as a crutch to excuse a questionable portrayal in a new piece of children's media today strikes me personally as an extremely flawed argument, and kind of a weak one at that. Especially because younger children often engage in ritualistic viewing and watching the same films or the same episodes of TV over and over again. The portrayals that they see often become reinforced through this repetition, not to mention through the commodification of extended play with toys outside of viewing time, and hence this stuff can really actually impact them in the long run. Too often for little girls, this prolonged exposure to depictions of unrealistic, ultra-skinny, sexualized female body types early in their childhood can sometimes lead to, serious body dissatisfaction later on, and unhealthy self-loathing and even self-harming behaviors as a result. Considering the seriousness of these issues and the ease with which non-sexualized, non-anorexic-looking portrayals of female characters in children's media can be created, it seems very strange that these types of portrayals still persist in young children's media, in spite of a wealth of evidence suggesting that they can, indeed, do real harm to children's perceptions over time. On the opposite end of the spectrum, however, We also have wonderfully empowering toys for girls springing up in a grassroots fashion these days, thanks to the internet and modern 3D printing technology, like the I Am Elemental toy line, a successful Kickstarter campaign from a few years back that was started by Julie Kerwin, a mother who was struck by the lack of non-sexualized female superhero toys available to purchase from mainstream toy stores when she went shopping for a child's birthday present. Correctly recognizing that most of these hypersexualized female superhero toys were really meant for adult male collectors, Kerwin set up a Kickstarter campaign to create superhero action figures for girls with, as it says on their page, a healthier breast-to-hip ratio, a bum that wasn't offensive, and legs that were proportional to her body. Raising the question of gender equality in children's toys, specifically, would you, for instance, make a male action figure for little boys with a sexual body part so large that he couldn't stand up without falling over, like they do for Barbie? That would be weird, right? Maybe it's equally weird to do that to little girls. But raising this question, Kerwin created the I Am Elemental toy line with the belief that if you give a girl a different toy, she will tell a different story. To date, I Am Elemental has been featured at New York Comic Con, was a finalist in the 2018 Action Figure Awards, and has 2 waves of female superhero action figures with realistic body proportions based on real-life female athletes available to purchase from their website right now. So check it out. Now, speaking of all the commodification we see in children's media through the sale of toys, this brings me back to a discussion of the extreme culture of commodification, specifically surrounding women, that rose out of the 1990s and early 2000s. Post-feminism. That's right! Post-feminism, a vocabulary term. So, post-feminism, confusingly, actually has multiple self-contradicting definitions, but for our purposes we will define it here simply as a belief in a culture that has somehow solved sexism once and for all time, and hence has no further need for feminism because it has moved beyond it. Kind of analogous to the idea that America was somehow suddenly a post-racial society after the election of Barack Obama as the first black president, and had therefore cured racism once and for all. A laughable idea to say the least, even at the time, but especially when looked at from a present-day perspective. So confusingly, post-feminism is often conflated with third-wave feminism, that's right, third-wave feminism, another vocabulary term, which is in a way actually the opposite of post-feminism. The both of them arose around the same time, you know, the 90s throughout the early 2000s, which may be part of why some people often conflate them. Third wave feminism is basically an extension of second wave feminism from the 60s and 70s, but with the added benefit of the concept of intersectionality. Third wave focuses more on including women of color, trans and queer women, disabled women, and other women belonging to minority groups too often left out of the conversation by second wave's more cisgendered, heterosexual, white, able focus. Third wave began circa 1992 when Ms. Magazine published an article entitled Becoming the Third Wave, a response to the confirmation of Clarence Thomas into the Supreme Court, despite Anita Hill's accusing him of sexual harassment. Sound familiar? Brett Kavanaugh, anybody? It's been going on for a while. The fact that Anita Hill was a black woman testifying before an all-white, all-male Senate Judiciary Committee that ultimately ignored her testimony highlighted the idea that women of different races can experience layers of oppression, hence the idea of intersectionality entering into third-wave feminism. Now, here's where the whole thing starts to break down and get really hairy. Basically, in earlier periods, it seemed to make a lot of sense to describe feminism in terms of waves. First wave was obviously about the suffragettes and the right to vote in the year 1920. Second wave came about in the 60s and 70s when issues of women's reproductive rights first became a mainstream political discussion. But after that, a lot of scholars have pointed out that wave theory doesn't really apply anymore because starting with third wave, things begin to get a little hairy with multiple waves of feminism coexisting simultaneously. For instance, throughout the 90s and early 2000s, and even today, we simultaneously had older adult women who identified as second-wave feminists, simultaneously existing with typically younger women who identified themselves as third-wave, and, of course, the gender inequality denialists who called themselves post-feminists, all existing at the same time, making this wave theory a highly questionable model, to say the least. But in a nutshell, first wave was about women's voting rights, second wave was about reproductive rights, third wave was about intersectionality and minority women's rights, and post-feminism was a kind of anti-feminist denialism of women's unequal treatment as a wholesale concept. You following me about this? Stay tuned and we'll talk about fourth wave a little later. Whew. It's a lot, I know. Good luck. Anyway, here's where we unfortunately have to head into one more dark tunnel of sexist oppressive nonsense before we can come out on the other end to the return to heroism promised by this class's title. Don't worry, it's just the dark tunnel of early 2000s post-feminism, the dark tunnel of female portrayals in media that most of your generation grew up with, for better or for worse, so at least it should be a familiar dark tunnel to you, albeit still a rough one. In the fabulous, albeit rather depressing scholarly study of post-feminism, What a Girl Wants by Diane Negro, which I have right here, if you're in for some depressing but highly informative reading. Oh, man. In What a Girl Wants, post-feminism is described as kind of a cultural backlash to an imaginary version of feminism that took place in the late 1990s through the early 2000s, in which the imaginary concept of the feminist was stereotyped, in Diane Negro's words, as being rigid, serious, anti-sex and romance, difficult and extremist, whereas, in contrast, post-feminism offers the pleasure and comfort of reclaiming an identity uncomplicated by gender politics. As if it were even possible to have a gender identity somehow uncomplicated by gender politics. Whatever. Willfully misconstruing feminists of all waves as feminazis, a term popularized throughout the early 2000s, post-feminism demonized the very idea, the very word feminist itself, afflicting it with a controversial connotation in service of shutting down dissent and slandering women who attempted to stand up for their rights and the rights of other women as feminazi extremists. I myself have been called that plenty of times, and interestingly, all during the first 10 years of the early 2000s. It was a bad time. This was coupled with a sort of neoconservative cultural push during the second Bush administration, W's administration, to silence women's objections to inequality through encouraging even women to look down on feminists as unreasonable extremists, encouraging the average woman to see feminists as other, and to want to get one over on those censorious feminists, as Diane Negra puts it, by doing things like using sexist terminology to describe other women, competing with other women in toxic ways, supporting hypersexualized portrayals of women in media, speaking in defense of sexist depictions and treatment, and encouraging women to believe that in doing so they were somehow being progressive and sexually liberating themselves against the chains of feminism.
Those poor people.
Unfortunately, a lot of women fell for it, and a lot of men did too. You may, in fact, see this idea reflected in media, particularly media intended for adult women, coming out of the late 90s through the early 2000s, and even as late as the early 2010s, particularly in so-called chick flicks of the era, films meant for women, but which nevertheless push the envelope in terms of raunch and sexualized female portrayals, and very often stressing narratives centering around women who learn the lesson that their foray into the world of a successful career was a mere distraction, and that their true destiny lies with becoming a mother and housewife to Mr. Right in the old hometown. You see this type of narrative again and again throughout the decade of the 2000s with films like 2006's Devil Wears Prada, Bridget Jones's Diary from 2001, Sweet Home Alabama from 2002, Kate and Leopold from 2001, Serendipity from 2001, the Sex and the City movie from 2008, and many, many others throughout this decade. Incidentally, perhaps the most notorious still-running recapitulation of the regressive post-feminist filmic narrative is the heavily parodied Hallmark movies, films which often engage in this same regressive post-feminist storyline that supposedly emphasizes a woman's freedom of choice as it pertains to her lifestyle choices and work-life balance, but which ultimately just end up advocating a hackneyed and highly conservative traditionalist notion that a woman's true place is back in the home, her true calling is romance and motherhood, and, you know, that her successful career of paid labor was a mere distraction from these more important callings of marriage and motherhood. In every single filmic instance, her right choice is depicted as being the one of marriage and motherhood, never her career or the fulfillment of her own personal goals outside of traditionalist domesticity, a highly problematic portrayal to say the least, especially considering how consistently this narrative was depicted throughout the first decade or so of the early 2000s. Needless to say, this is not the type of narrative that we ever see portrayed for a man. Can you imagine a Hallmark movie or, say, an early 2000s chick flick that depicted a gender swap of these concepts? Can you imagine a movie about a highly successful businessman whose family and friends were always putting him down, always negging him, belittling his success and telling him he really needs to just find Miss Right, quit his job, end his career, settle down, and become a responsible stay-at-home dad? And can you imagine the film's storyline having him listen to this advice, to take it to heart, and to do these things, giving up a successful business career at which he excelled because his true calling was marriage and stay-at-home fatherhood? To be honest, we need more or even one such story. Not only to balance things out in terms of gender portrayals, not only to illustrate how ludicrous it is in the first place to depict this plotline to women, but really to support those men who make this very decision in real life, as men in our culture are so often pressured to lead lives of investment in their work at the expense of their investment in their own children. And the truth is that some men's true calling actually is to be stay-at-home dads, and we should allow that. We've got to stop shaming and looking down on men who choose to do this, and to stop shaming and looking down on women who choose to have careers. In short, we simply need a more balanced portrayal. Another toxic aspect of post-feminism is the neoconservative bootstrapism that it advocates via women's luxury lifestyle choices and the advertisement of supposedly de-aging luxury products to women. These ideas were based on a combination of false notions, among them A, that women need to avoid aging and men don't, B, that women even can avoid aging through the purchase of expensive luxury products, and C, that the decision of whether or not to buy such products was based on women's freedom and personal lifestyle choice, and not whether or not a given woman was rich enough to afford them. The idea that women have a limited shelf life in which to attract a mate and become a mother, according to post-feminism, their true calling after all, lends itself easily to a kind of toxic, manipulative consumerism in which anti-aging beauty products and luxury cosmetics, diet regimens, and surgical treatments become popular commodities and, were really heavily advertised to women in the mainstream throughout the early 2000s, regardless of the fact that these commodities and treatments are really exclusively available to rich people due to the extreme expense and time commitments that they require. This, you may recall, is the era of the height of photoshopping magazine models to look skinnier and more anorexic, the height of hypersexualizing women in film and media to extremely unrealistic standards, and the height of female objectification in American culture and media history, as we saw at the very beginning of this semester through the documentary film Misrepresentation, made at the apex of these problems in the year 2011. The post-feminist narrative frequently depicts femininity in an alternating state of either constant panic over aging and relaxing luxury lifestyle choices on the other end of this spectrum, without addressing the fact that the escapism that's advertised through these luxury lifestyle choices is not only predatory, like the women's magazines that we discussed in previous classes, solving problems that women didn't even know that they had and profiteering off of insecurities, but they're also ineffective because you can't actually reverse the aging process. That's impossible. And these were actually also racist and classist because they're largely only available to rich white women, the main demographic targeted and also depicted in ads and media at this time in the first place. It is out of the very beginning of this post-feminism era in the early 1990s that we get Naomi Wolf's brilliant observations in The Beauty Myth, recognizing that the cultural and psychological damage just beginning to be done to women through post-feminist advertising and media portrayals was actually a deliberate political move meant to control women, a delayed backlash after they had made significant cultural and political gains in the 1970s. After all, it would be, gauche to suggest that, women's places in the home after the advent of second-wave feminism in the 60s and 70s, you'd be called a sexist. But if you make it all about women's freedom of choice and individual lifestyles, and then also bombard, decades worth of young women with media disproportionately glorifying the choice of domesticity and motherhood over having a career, you effectively get away with encouraging generations of women to be stay-at-home moms rather than joining the workforce in great numbers without having to directly say so and thus reveal your cultural agenda. It's a sort of reversal, in a way, of the propaganda glorifying women's work that took place during World War II. Now, while I'm at it, I'd like to point out a huge complicating factor of the post-feminist narrative that actually seems to have wormed its way into third-wave feminism, further complicating your vocabulary terms right before the final exam. Sorry. The idea of lifestyle choice and the notion that women can have it all, meaning have both a career and also a fulfilling marriage with children, is certainly a complicated aspect of third-wave feminism that, in an attempt to encourage women to pursue every aspect of their goals and dreams, ended up accidentally putting undue pressure on women to do the impossible and basically live two lives crammed into the span of one given lifetime. For an illustration of this issue, I refer you to basically any media that Tina Fey ever had a hand in creating, as she's not only a fabulously brilliant comedian and writer, but also a rather sharp and apt cultural critic of this aspect of third-wave feminism, and can basically, be seen making these critiques in a lot of her portrayals, especially of the Liz Lemon character throughout the entire run of the 30 Rock series, but perhaps nowhere as clearly and concisely as in this clip from 2017's Great News.
Unfortunately, I don't have time to take on a protege, but here's some advice. Stop doubting yourself. Focus on your work and freeze your eggs. Worrying about your personal life is a distraction. Take marriage and kids off the table and you can stay laser focused on your career. 30 is for working, 50 is for having kids, and 140 is for dying. Goodbye.
Oh, thank you so much for that advice. This is really a dream come.
Now, I'd like to comment briefly on this idea of female shelf life, bringing it back to, of course, you guessed it, ancient evolutionary primalist theory, because, this is me. It's what I do. Now, first of all, I'd like to point out that this shelf life thing is all pretty obviously a coded discussion for the amount of time that women have before menopause, the number of fertile years an adult woman has in which to produce offspring, discussed often in post-feminist media in terms of the biological clock. Your biological clock is ticking. Now, the interesting thing here is that humans are actually one of the only species on Earth whose females go through menopause. The only other two known species are killer whales and pilot whales. It's weird, right? Why would this be? Why would humans and randomly two whale species, no great apes, nothing like that, no primates, whale species, why would we be the only creatures on Earth whose females go through menopause while the males remain fertile, in some cases anyway, even into very old age? What's going on here? Why would we be evolved this way? Well, an interesting thing that human beings share in common with both of these whale species is a very long maturation period for our young. Human children take up to 18 years to mature, with both killer whales and pilot whales taking up to 16 years. That's a very long time, unusually long in the animal kingdom, and as we discussed when we covered the movie Terminator, females of a mammal species whose young take a very long time to mature, like humans, are necessary to the survival of the next generation in a way that males of the species are not. Therefore, it is vital that females of this species be evolved to live relatively long lives, often into old age, so as to support and protect their young throughout the very slow process of their maturing until they have grown mature enough to look out for themselves. To this end, it is evolutionarily that is, detrimental to have these females risk dying in childbirth once their bodies become too old to handle the extreme trauma of birth and pregnancy. So rather than merely dying in childbirth like most of the species on this planet do in old age, human females, and also killer whale and pilot whale females, have evolved to have their ovulation cycle turn off as a safety measure to ensure that they live into old age to protect the next generation. Remember, too, that living into old age is less common, unfortunately, for males of the species, males of all of these species, that is, in the wild, especially humans, who, as we have discussed, still see disproportionately more male deaths for every condition and at every age than female deaths, even despite the fact that, unlike whales, humans have advanced medicine, unnaturally comfortable temperature-controlled environments to live in, and a near-complete extinction of all of our natural predators and all sorts of other advantages that whales generally lack. Going back to Naomi Wolf's The Beauty Myth, we may recall her brief discussion of the goddess religions of various ancient cultures, which often depicted an older female goddess romantically involved with a large number of much younger and expendable, as Wolf puts it, male consorts. Now here's the thing. Given the relative likelihood of ancient female humans to live longer lives, and the relative unlikelihood for males of the species to do the same, together with the polyamorous nature of ancient human societies, we can begin to see that the idea of older women mating with a large group of younger men, as depicted in so many of Naomi Wolf's goddess religions around the world, we can see that this might actually just be a portrait of real, normal, lived experience of ancient humans in a pre-agricultural world. It stands to reason that in a society where, as we learned from Terminator, males are relatively expendable and therefore less likely to make it to old age, while females are vitally necessary to protect the next generation and thus evolve to survive longer, we would of course be seeing a population with more older females than older males, especially in the wild, and therefore it stands to reason that that's who might be mating with each other in a hunter-gatherer society. On a side note, if you ever get a chance to go to the Museum of Natural History in New York City, a great place, their collection of ancient human remains contains one of the only known specimens of an ancient person who lived deep into old age. A single skull on display on their wall with no teeth, the upper gum ridge worn smooth and thin with use, and a title card explaining that this is one of the only known specimens of a very elderly person, an old woman, in fact, known to ancient human archaeology, noting also that she must have been a highly respected and greatly valued pack member, as it would have taken a considerable investment of effort, dedication, and care to help keep her alive so long past her ability to provide and fend for herself. This brings me briefly to a discussion of the privileged special status of postmenopausal women in multiple ancient cultures, particularly those across pre-Roman Europe, which even Julius Caesar actually mentioned in his campaign notes, that these cultures were obviously much more feministic than the culture of the Romans, who of course later conquered them. The idea of the wise woman, found in pre-Roman cultures across Europe, and sometimes even persisting long afterwards, illustrates the consistent notion of a postmenopausal woman with an elevated semi-sacred status of regard among the human pack, someone who has lived a long time and thus has the wisdom of age to impart to the next generation, and hence is in a position of power and authority. It is, of course, significant that this character is female, given that pre-agricultural societies would naturally be less likely to foster men living into old age than women, the Terminator phenomenon, if you will, and a concept supported by the physical evidence of which gender's elderly skulls have survived the fossil record. Perhaps even more significant, though, is that when the Roman Empire fell and Christianity began to spread throughout Europe, one of the ways that Christian missionaries colonized and subjugated the native cultures across Europe in order to convert them was to demonize the wise women held in high regard by these cultures, labeling them witches, and thus discrediting their authority and establishing a patriarchal Judeo-Christian concept of male authority that ultimately succeeded in supplanting the more relatively gender-equal and even female-worshipping hunter-gatherer cultures that were once found across Europe. The bottom line is that the idea of women's shelf life is, of course, yet another patriarchal political construct meant to control women by instilling in them a sense of shame over their own body's biology, a belief that childbearing is their only important function, and especially a sense of worthlessness after they reach a certain age, an age at which, in the ancient natural world, women actually became the most powerful. Again, this is about politics, it's about control, and early 2000s post-feminism is all about controlling women. Let's take a look at a clip from 2006's The Holiday to illustrate the role that media played in sending this toxic post-feminist message about the idea of women's aging to audiences throughout the early 2000s.
Did you read that article in the New York Times last Sunday? Severe stress makes women age prematurely because stress causes the DNA in our cells to shrink until they can no longer replicate. So when we're stressed, we look haggard. This is just women, not men.
I'm sorry.
And remember when they used to say that single women over the age of 35 were more likely to be killed by a terrorist than to get married? Okay, that was horrible. But now our generation is also not getting married, and bonus, real terrorists actually became part of our lives. So the stress of it all shows up on our faces, making us look haggard. Well, Ethan goes on looking cute forever and still being his 24-year-old receptionist. Oh my God. See what I mean? I need a vacation.
Now, just FYI, the idea that these things only affect women and not men is a flat-out lie. Of course men are aged by stress. Just look at any before and after picture of any given president. Even Trump, who barely does his job, has faded to a much paler shade of orange than even his unnatural hue. This is nothing more than an inaccurate, unscientific falsehood stated carelessly in a fiction movie script, but it's the kind of thing that sounds just sciencey enough to be real, and as such runs the risk of convincing and influencing real women's beliefs and perceptions, as it strikes me, appears to be the intention here behind this message in a post-feministic filmic narrative. Of course, it is couched in the deniability of fiction, the deniability of Cameron Diaz's character being an overworked, youth-obsessed California culture stereotype of a woman concerned with her diet, her age, her appearance, and her desirability to men above perhaps all else. It is this cultural stereotype that we see repeated again and again throughout media in the early 2000s, particularly media meant for women. This idea that in order to write a female character, screenwriters had to fill her personality with insecurities and superficial stereotypical concerns about her appearance, diet, age, weight, desirability, biological clock, and so on, illustrating a belief that this is what women were, what we wanted to see in movies, and that these issues were somehow of primary concern to all of us. Speaking for myself, I don't really relate to these things at all. I don't think about these things. These issues are at best, at most, peripheral to me personally. I eat food. I like it. It's not really a big part of my life. I don't really, think about my diet. I don't cut gluten out or whatever the fad of the moment is. People without allergies have been eating gluten for thousands of years. I don't really think that that's a concern for me. I don't have an allergy. It's quarantine, like, we're all getting fat, like, get over it. Other than maybe, like, combing my hair or whatever I do before I, appear in public to give a lesson or a talk or record this kind of a video, I don't really, give that much thought to my appearance. I wear what makes me comfortable. I dress for myself. I'm proud of the way that I'm aging. The few gray hairs that I've noticed emerging are happening in the same front-first pattern that my father wore when he went gray before me. I'm honored to be able to follow in his footsteps. I want to age gracefully, and I'm proud of the age that I am. I'm happy to be who I am and to grow as I grow. I do plan to have kids, but it'll happen when it happens. Fertility technology has improved to the point where a 74-year-old woman in India literally just gave birth to twins last year. Not that I personally plan to wait that long. I think that's older than I would like to be, but suffice it to say that I'm not really that concerned. I know that it's possible. It'll happen when it happens. My age, appearance, diet, clothing, and whatever other things women are supposedly concerned with, according to post-feminism, and fostered and pushed into the mainstream by the post-feminist panic narrative, are in no way a part of my personal self-concept, and I don't think that they really are a part of many women's personal self-concepts. It's, they don't relate to me, they don't speak to me, they're not remotely a part of who I am. My message to you, of course, is to take these ideas with a grain of salt, recognize them as the political constructs that they are, the attempts to control you that they are, and that they always were. To be proud of yourself regardless and independent of your physical appearance. This is just superficial nonsense. It's totally meaningless, that is. Your appearance, all of our appearances are temporary. They change constantly. We're in a constant state of transformation from, babyhood up to death. It's like we are changing creatures, and what we look like is always going to be in flux. It's not what's important about us. Our appearance is probably the least important thing about us. What's important is, what we can cultivate and take with us long throughout our lives. Our minds, our compassion, our capacity to care for and help and love each other towards the greatest good, and our ability to work towards the greatest possible benefit for all. Fortunately for us, we now have a tool that brings us closer than ever before to achieving this ideal: the internet. Despite its many flaws, the internet is the single human technological tool creditable with having brought our species closer than ever before to an understanding of our own shared humanity. It's through the unprecedented levels of global interconnectivity made possible by this relatively unregulated international cyberspace that we are hearing the voices of so many individual members of historically silenced and disenfranchised groups. It is, in truth, thanks to the internet that the majority of Americans now support gay marriage, that we recognize, gay and trans people as humans, that the idea that Black Lives Matter has come to the forefront, that the average non-Black American has finally become aware of the routine institutionalized murder of unarmed Black men by the American police, and that the stories of women who have survived sexual harassment, assault, and abuse are finally being told and listened to, perhaps for the first time in post-patriarchal human history. The hashtag #MeToo movement has itself become the catalyst to usher in a new and the most recent and currently ongoing wave of feminism, fourth wave feminism. Fourth wave feminism. Promised you we'd talk about it. Fourth wave feminism is characterized by the use of social media and other internet-based tools to spread real narratives of real women's experiences so as to enfranchise and amplify traditionally silenced female voices, particularly those who accuse powerful men of sexual harassment, assault, and abuse, but also those who advocate for equal opportunities for men and women, and who encourage the idea that breaking free from gender norms can ultimately be healthier for people of all genders, for example, teaching men that it's okay to express their emotions, or to be stay-at-home dads if they want to be, or to come forth with their own stories of traditionally silenced male sexual assault, and so on. Fourth wave feminism is actually a pretty good moment to be in, and is ultimately the embodiment of the light that I promised you at the end of the dark tunnel of early 2000s post-feminism. Existing perhaps in part as the cultural backswing against post-feminism, in part as a media explosion circa 2017, and in part as an ongoing internet and social media presence of personal anecdotal truth-telling that I, for one, hope continues for a very long time. Fourth wave feminism, like other historically suppressed causes brought forth into the public view through the internet, has finally put forth the very cogent idea that men and women are actually not that different after all, and most significantly, in fact, that women are human beings. What a concept! This happens, to have brought up a whole slew of other issues that continue to be fought for today, like, for instance, questioning the idea of why it is that women and not men should be expected to give up their jobs in order to raise a family, especially when there are men who would like to be the ones to get to do this, and women who would prefer to work. The traditional assumption has been that since women may become pregnant and will therefore need to take at least a couple of weeks, if not months, of time off in order to give birth and recover, that therefore women run the risk of being fired from their jobs in a very mercenary way that punishes them for having bodies capable of giving birth and thus requiring these extended absences when they choose to do so. Fourth wave feminism questions this notion and raises the idea that this is just gender discrimination, plain and simple. Women are the ones whose bodies are needed to gestate the next generation. This is something that we have no control or choice over. Human beings aren't seahorses. We can't just choose which gender gets to carry the baby. We're also not like Arnold Schwarzenegger in the movie Junior. If a man has offspring, his body isn't needed beyond the moment of copulation, as we discussed through another Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, Terminator, in the way that a woman's body is. There is no real reason why we couldn't simply reframe our systems to account for this fact, as many other countries already do, particularly Nordic countries, in which women and men are both given up to about a year's worth of paid parental leave. Paid parental leave, that is. Paid after having a baby, with their same jobs kept waiting for them at the same pay rate when they return the following year. Think of that. Anyway, the point is, again, as with many other groups historically disenfranchised by white American patriarchy, the internet has given voice to real women's real experiences, and hearing these voices and seeing the ensuing and ongoing rise in cultural support for them, even Hollywood and other branches of mainstream fiction media have begun to change their tunes. Perhaps it's a function of the fact that the internet is helping more and more people grasp that women are human beings, helping ultimately to de-other them, even to themselves, as we've seen basically undoing the work of post-feminism's attempt to keep women in the box by seeing themselves as other. Perhaps it's a function of this ongoing mass realization of women's humanity that we are beginning to see a return to the sort of heroic female roles that we haven't really seen since the era of the serial queen melodrama, a kind of heroic female portrayal that hasn't come out of our media for nearly 100 years. For perhaps the first such example in recent filmic history, let's take another look at Rey, the female protagonist of the new Star Wars trilogy, as seen through this clip from 2015's The Force Awakens.
Rey! 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 No. Rey! Traitor! That lightsaber, it belongs to me. Come get it. I can show you the ways of the Force!
Interestingly, as we will see for many such pieces going forward, unfortunately there was an initial backlash against the progressivism of the casting in The Force Awakens, particularly against the casting of John Boyega as the so-called first Black Stormtrooper, because starting with the original Star Wars film in 1977, a good number of the Stormtrooper actors were actually black. You just never saw them out of costume, as they were all extras hired for being the same height. And of course, you know, you never saw them out of their helmets, and so you never knew. Anyway, in addition to this, there was also an unfortunate initial backlash against the very concept of having a female main character in a Star Wars movie, and an awful lot of complaining from male fans about the implausibility of Rey's proficiency with a lightsaber and mastery of the Force with little to no training, despite the fact that all sorts of unlikely and implausible things happen in the Star Wars universe all the time without eliciting fan comment. Of particular interest to me, however, was the hashtag Where's Rey movement, a short-lived phenomenon to come in the wake of the release of Star Wars The Force Awakens, in which children, parents, and toy collectors found themselves unable to buy action figures of the main character Rey, the Luke Skywalker equivalent protagonist of the new Star Wars franchise, because Disney executives were still under the dated misimpression that nobody buys action figures of female characters, a notion with little supportive evidence in the first place, and which proved to obviously be false by this Where's Rey movement. As a result, Rey action figures were wildly underproduced, and not even included in packaged figure sets that did include even unimportant peripheral male characters, resulting in widespread parent, fan, and collector outrage that constituted the hashtag Where's Rey movement. Personally, I have my sources and was able to snag a Star Wars Black Series Rey action figure at the height of their scarcity for a pretty good price, which I'm actually proud of. And of course now Disney has learned its lesson, and it's no longer difficult to find action figures of female characters in everything from Star Wars movies to the Mandalorian series. In fact, for those of you who have been wondering what this is, that's Rey. Where's Rey? She's right here. Anyway. So speaking of female action figures in Star Wars movies, unfortunately leads me to a discussion of the much maligned Rose Tico character from the second installment of the franchise, The Last Jedi. Let's take a look.
Bing! It's too late! Don't do this!
No! I won't let them win!
No! Bing! Slip in the ball! We have to retreat!
I saved you. Tell me. That's how we're gonna win. Not fighting what we hate. saving what we love.
Apparently, the creation of Rose Tico, like the Equestria Girls, was a top-down corporate decision designed to sell more toys to little girls. Disney wanted another female main character to sell action figures of, perhaps as a result of the unexpectedly high demand for Rey action figures that they encountered in the Where's Rey movement, and therefore writer-director Rian Johnson was asked to create another female main character for the second movie. Originally, interestingly enough, Rose Tico was actually written to be a white woman, but was recast late in the game as the first Asian female main character in Star Wars universe history, with the choice of Kelly Marie Tran in the role. Unfortunately, there was a huge, massively racist, sexist, and just plain awful toxic backlash against the character of Rose Tico, and a horrible campaign of harassment and hate directed against the Rose Tico actress Kelly Marie Tran, led by trolls and toxic fans on the internet. Now, this is my own personal opinion, and in no way do I mean to excuse or give any support whatsoever to the horrendous behavior of the toxic hater troll campaigners carried out online. But I must admit that from the get-go, when I saw the movie, it did strike me as immediately obvious that the Rose Tico character was, in truth, a poorly written character who lacked a clear motivation for being there and felt very much like a side character inorganically shoehorned into main character status by a corporate mandate in order to sell more toys, as I later learned. This would have been true whatever the casting. In fact, I think her minority representing status is one of the best things about the Rose Tico character, and I really do think that she would have come off as much worse had she just been cast as yet another white woman, which ultimately illustrates to me the idea that maybe the takeaway here is to encourage writers to tell stories organically, rather than to force new characters into the mix in order to sell more toys. On the other hand, I also feel like Rian Johnson could have and should have done a much better job with the character than he did, even given the top-down corporate nature of the decision to create the Rose Tico character. And that Johnson really honestly failed actress Kelly Marie Tran by putting her in the position of portraying a badly written character who took an unnecessary amount of flack and hate on the internet. Because here's the thing. Even though some young white male audiences were initially resistant to the characters of Rey and Finn in the first film for racist and sexist reasons, these characters were ultimately accepted even by a majority of the haters. In the end, I think in part because they were so well written, so relatable, and so easy to identify with and root for. Haters are still awful, don't get me wrong, but the fact that many of them can be brought around by skillful writing and storytelling techniques that make a fictional character relatable even to people, even to audiences who are, unfairly biased against them, illustrates the idea that there probably was a way to have written Rose Tico that would have worked to bring even the haters on board with her character. Unfortunately, knowing what a racist, sexist society we live in means understanding that some portion of the audience will be unduly and irrationally resistant to non-white, non-male main characters, which is wrong and a shame, but which also illustrates the need right now to do extra well by these characters when we do create them, to write them extra well and portray them extra relatably, at least until there are enough of them in the mainstream media to be widely accepted, at which point we can then perhaps afford to write them as lazily and uncreatively as the average white male character is written. Until that time, I feel like another good idea would have been to have maybe planned the Star Wars series out in advance, like it was, a movie trilogy, rather than to basically wing it on a film-by-film basis and wind up having the last two films end up feeling like an argument between Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams enacted through incongruous storytelling across two feature films. But I digress. As we talked about before, Daisy Ridley's audition for the character of Rey was an interesting example of compromised feminism that just doesn't come off as nearly as bad as in the actual scene in the finished film. the scene, is significantly toned down and actually much more empowering to Rey than it is in the version that we see through her audition tape. I would say that Rey, as she exists in the finished new Star Wars trilogy, is actually one of the only, if not the first, example of truly uncompromised feminism in recent film history. Of course, as we discussed before, another such example that's actually multiplied by 4 is the portrayal of the 4 main characters in 2016's Ghostbusters movie, a film starring 4 adult female comedians who, as Aaron Ramsey puts it, save the world in dirty, baggy MTA jumpsuits. Let's take another look at Ghostbusters right now.
It's a class 4 apparition. It's okay. She seems peaceful.
My name is Erin Gilbert, Doctor of Particle Physics.
That stuff went everywhere, by the way, in every crack. Very hard to wash off.
We have dedicated our whole lives to studying the paranormal. Now there's sightings all over the city. There are people out there that need our help. Holtzman, you're a brilliant engineer. Erin, no one's better at quantum physics than you. We can provide a real service.
I'm joining the club. You guys are really smart about this science stuff, but I know New York. And I can borrow a car from my uncle.
You didn't disclose that the vehicle was going to be a hearse.
It's a Cadillac!
Let's go.
Let's go.
Oh, did you want to?
Sorry, I'll let you.
Next time. Okay.
Someone is creating a device that amplifies paranormal activity. And we might be the only ones who can stop it.
Holtzman, come on.
The hat is too much, right? Is it the wig or the hat?
There's a bigger picture at hand here. These ghosts can possess the human form.
Oh, hell no, the devil is a liar! Get out of my friend, ghost!
Ow, that's gonna leave a mark.
The power of pain compels you!
Ow!
You carry a lot of tension in your shoulders.
I'm sorry, hello? Who are you?
Holtzman. Virgo, avid skier, gluten full, and 100% jazzed to meet you.
Well, don't get too close to her, Holtzman. She'll ask you to write a book and then she'll squash your dreams.
Okay.
Holtzman works with me here in the lab. She's a brilliant engineer and very loyal. She would not abandon you.
I get it.
She also happens to specialize in experimental particle physics.
Oh.
Susan was hired by CERN.
It's very impressive. Oh, what happened?
There was a lab incident.
But he's gonna wake up.
He woke up yesterday.
Great.
Then he screamed and went back into a coma.
When it feels like the world is on your shoulders and all of the madness has got you going crazy.
Oh, we're dancing. Let's be safe, though.
Where all of the action is right there at your feet. Well, I know a place where we can dance.
Holtzman! Fire! Over towards a fire. Thank you.
I hate to debarge in. She loves it.
Is that by DeBarge? I thought it was Devo.
Now, despite the internet backlash that Ghostbusters inspired, mainly, it turns out, from angry white men who never actually saw the film, which to me is just invalidating your own opinion and being a bad fan. You can't know that you didn't like a movie if you never saw it. That's cheating. If you're doing that, your opinion doesn't count. In spite of this, Ghostbusters 2016 is, as a matter of fact, a much more solidly constructed piece of storytelling than the original two classic Ghostbusters movies that actually solves a lot of problems with the original film series. Like, the reason why all these ghosts are suddenly showing up in the first place. Kind of a biggie there, right? And portrays a far more cogent, relatable, and heroic story of four unfairly disgraced underdogs fighting for what they believe in and saving the world in the process. Unlike the original portrayal of four men just kind of screwing around and winging it, jumping from success to easy success, a portrayal especially compromised by the choice to let Bill Murray just kind of ad-lib all his lines in a sardonic, unconcerned manner that, while humorous, nevertheless interferes with the narrative, seriously weakens the dramatic tension, and ultimately lowers the stakes of the story. In short, from a storytelling perspective, Ghostbusters 2016 is the objectively superior film, and if you haven't already seen it, I highly recommend you do so. But for now, let's take a look at another clip or two from Ghostbusters 2016.
Hey, I'm here about the receptionist job.
Hi.
Hey.
Is this a big old robot? What?
The receptionist job that was in the paper I was here about.
You're hired.
Okay, God, you're all sweaty. I think I got it. If there's something strange in the name... Oh. Oh, Kevin, right?
Kevin.
Yeah.
Abby, we spoke on the phone.
We did,
Hello
yeah.
there. Okay.
Kevin. Oh, that's a manly name. My name's Erin, with an E, for everything you want.
Okay. Well, we should probably get started. Erin, do you want to join us?
Yes. Erin, I've got some questions.
Okay. Here we go. Let me just get to my notes. Okay. All right. First off, I just want to say...
You know, we should probably start with a very important question that we're asking all of the applicants. You know, are you seeing anyone right now?
Seeing anyone?
Yeah, just for business purposes.
Business purposes only.
I'm seeing all three of you in front of me.
Just forget she even asked, because if she did, that would be illegal. So...
Forgotten.
Jillian Holtzman, Radio Times. What have you been doing with your whole life?
Great question.
Oh, well, lots of different jobs. I did the actor thing. Worked for...
Just real quick, can I ask why no glass?
Oh, yeah. They just kept getting dirty, so I took them out. I don't have to clean them anymore. You know,
Oh,
I can just...
boy. I gotta try to keep that in mind.
Would it be okay if I bring my cat to work sometimes? He has major anxiety problems.
You know what? I would love to let your cat live here with you, but I have a pretty severe cat allergy.
Oh, I don't have a cat. He's a dog. His name's my cat.
Your dog's name is my cat?
And Mike Hat.
Your dog's name is Mike, last name Hat.
Well, his full name is Michael Hat.
I can't say that I'm allergic to dogs, so...
Yeah, that's all right. He lives with my mum.
Well, then we have that figured out.
Interestingly, there was actually some backlash from men on the internet, apparently men who did see the film, against the portrayal of the dumb but sexy male secretary played by Chris Hemsworth. Needless to say, the idea of a dumb but sexy female secretary is an overplayed sexist stereotype that we see all the time, whereas the idea of gender swapping this character was not only yet another example of a very funny, highly effective storytelling choice, but was also the only such portrayal of a male character that I can bring up to my mind out of over 135 years of film history. I think that it's fair to say that this portrayal is significantly less common and therefore does significantly less damage to men than the reverse does to women, culturally speaking, and is therefore not really a concern to be taken over seriously. Now, out of all the examples of true, uncompromised feministic portrayals to come out of the film industry in recent years, I think the 2016 Ghostbusters actually comes out looking the very best. It is the example with the least amount of female sexualization, even less than in Star Wars, even less than in Alien, which makes its incredibly badass female power fight sequences resonate in a uniquely profound way, especially to female viewers who are, so rarely, if ever, allowed to see themselves portrayed like this. That is, like male heroes are portrayed all the time. It's unfortunate for this reason that the disproportionate internet-fueled rage fire of backlash against this film from such a large number of people who never even saw it was ultimately successful in killing off the possibility of a sequel, weakening, though not destroying, its box office returns, and discouraging a large number of otherwise unaware people away from seeing it by popularizing an unnecessary and manufactured controversy around a perfectly normal and in fact highly entertaining, exceptionally progressive, and significantly groundbreaking film. Again, if you haven't already done so, I urge you to watch the 2016 Ghostbuster movie. Add it to your quarantine queue. Now, before we go any further, your assignment for tonight is another pop quiz! Haha, that's right, I'm sneaking one in right under the wire. It's the last pop quiz of the semester, and it's there to help you study, believe it or not, for the final exam by giving you the lowdown on some of the vocabulary you might see on the final exam, so you can correct your notes tomorrow once I've graded it. So check back. So anyway, pause the video, go to the assignments tab of Web Campus, and take pop quiz number 5 right now. Okay, you did it? Good. I hope that you did well. And I'll most likely get everything graded for you by tomorrow so that you can have your corrected vocabulary notes in preparation for the final. I'll email you and let you know when your grades are available. Now back to our discussion. So one of the only mainstream films in recent years to portray a heroic female main character without inspiring an insurmountable wave of internet backlash, of course, was the 2017 film Wonder Woman, which just so happens to also be the only film we've discussed so far today to be directed by a woman, Patty Jenkins, which I think is a pretty significant thing, that even though we're seeing all these female portrayals, they still continue to be mainly directed by men. Rather similar in many respects to 2018's Black Panther, another film with profoundly heroic and empowering female portrayals, Wonder Woman tells the story of a secret hidden nation of immortal female warriors with superior skills, education, technology, and standards of living than can be found in man's world, in Wonder Woman, that is, or outside of Wakanda in Black Panther. Both narratives center around this really interesting idea of a fictional alternate history that casts a historically underprivileged group, in one case women, in the other black people, as having had this secret, magical, high-tech superworld hidden in plain sight all along, where an entire population of, in the one case, Amazon women, and in the other, Wakandan people of the African diaspora, live these amazing secret lives of awesomeness without anyone from the backward, patriarchal, racist, colonial outside world knowing about it. From a realistic standpoint, these stories are, of course, a form of escapist fiction. But from a spiritual standpoint, they nonetheless both ring remarkably and resonantly true. I feel as though a large part of the appeal, popularity, and monetary success of both the Wonder Woman and Black Panther films has to do with the underlying spiritual message that they both seem to share, that women and black people are human beings, incredibly powerful, unspeakably ancient, and exactly as much the heroes of their own stories as the white male archetypes that have hogged the spotlight throughout filmic media history, pushing others out since the dawn of the Hollywood studio system basically in the early 1920s. Perhaps the fact that Wonder Woman and Black Panther's success have far outlasted and succeeded over their respective cases of relatively weaker internet hater backlash has to do with the fact that both of these characters were already well-established heroes of these same races and genders depicted in the films originating in comic books from decades past. Perhaps it's just a function of how incredibly well done these films were, or how resonant their underlying spiritual narratives were to large numbers of audience members who so seldom get to see themselves be the hero. Regardless of the reason, let's take a look at some clips from 2018's Black Panther with a particular focus on the women in the film, followed by some clips from 2017's Wonder Woman. Let's watch.
favor?
Heute moet ze diegene die niet de gondolen snappen, die worden als slaven meegenomen.
Wat is het gebeurd?
Bert, aan die andere kant van die loegang.
Dinah, we have to go.
We need to help these people.
We have to stay on mission. The next safe crossing is at least a day away. What are we waiting
We
for?
cannot leave without helping them. These people are dying. Nothing to eat, and in the village enslaved, she said.
I understand that.
Women,
we need
children.
to make our next position by
How
sunset.
can you say that? What is the matter with you?
This is no man's land, Diana. It means no man can cross it, all right? This battalion has been here for nearly a year, and they barely gained an inch. All right, because on the other side, there are a bunch of Germans pointing machine guns at every square inch of this place. This is not something you can cross. It's not possible.
So what? So we do nothing?
No, we are doing something. We are. We can't save everyone in this war. This is not what we came here to do.
No, but it's what I'm going to do.
Diana!
What the bloody hell is she playing at?
Engage! Fire! She's taking all the fire. Let's go! 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 Down! Strike them! Strike them! Let's move!
Again, it can certainly be argued that both Wonder Woman and, to a lesser degree, some of the clips of the women in Black Panther are examples, perhaps, of compromised feminism because of how unrealistically beautiful everyone looks all the time, even and especially while fighting, with apparently a minor controversy among feminists in 2017 who wanted to see a Wonder Woman with unshaven body hair. An interesting idea. But on the whole, I would say that these portrayals nevertheless come out in the end as feeling much more empowering ultimately than objectifying, and land, at least for me, in the realm of the badass more so than the sexist. Like an Alien, despite the relatively revealing clothing of certain female characters in certain scenes, we see no objectifying male gazy type camera work, no overemphasis on female body parts other than maybe Wonder Woman's armor-clad hands and forearms, and no significantly different treatment between the sexualization of male and female characters in each film. You are, of course, welcome to disagree with me on this, but for my money, though not as perfect perhaps as the portrayal of the 2016 Ghostbusters and their dirty, baggy MTA jumpsuits, Wonder Woman and Black Panther count in my book as some solidly hardcore feministic portrayals of badass, heroic, non-hypersexualized women in film. Now, speaking of heroic female superheroes, I'd like to turn our discussion now to the 2018 Netflix reboot of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power by DreamWorks Studio. Let's take a look at She-Ra right now.
Lord Hordak has been watching you, Adora. He thinks you are a fine candidate for Force Captain.
You've been promoted?
Your mission is to destroy the princess's rebellion.
This is what I have been working for my entire life. I wonder what's even outside the fright zone. We're gonna see the world and conquer it. Ketra, slow down!
Adora.
Ketra?
Oh, our planet needs you. Cool. The sword has chosen you. The time has come for your destiny.
Glimmer? I see her, Bo. All I did was pick up the sword and then whoosh! I'm in a tiara! We can't trust her.
Your army is called the Evil Horde.
Who calls us that?
Everybody!
I know the legend of the warrior called She-Ra. They said she would return to us in the hour of our greatest need.
There's something you should know. Horde soldier! I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm ready to fight to stop the Horde.
The rebellion accepts your allegiance. She-Ra, Princess of Power.
That's the coolest name I've ever heard.
Ketra? What are you doing here? Come on, let's go home already. I'm not going home. The Horde is evil. They've been lying to us. You have to help me. What happened to you? I'm sorry, Ketra.
She's just like every other princess. All sparkle, no substance.
What are you all doing here?
We want to rebuild the Princess Alliance.
You each have a skill that only you can do.
The Horde almost destroyed my home. I want to help fight them. Plus, your friend over there can turn into a 8-foot-tall lady with a sword, and I want her on my side.
Yeah! Stop her!
Proceed, Force Captain Ketra.
This isn't over!
Okay, Sword. Let's do this!
For the honor of Grayskull!
She-Ra and the Princesses of Power.
What's so particularly interesting about She-Ra is that the show is not only an excellent, highly feministic series with a cross-generational appeal to both adults and children alike, but it also has the status of being perhaps the most overtly out, proud, and pro-LGBTQ show for children or for anyone else currently running. This is, of course, not to diminish the impact of the recently ended series Steven Universe, likely the single cartoon series creditable with pushing the pro-LGBTQ agenda into the mainstream, especially in children's cartoons, and thus paving the way for the She-Ra Netflix show and hopefully others to come, especially in terms of the depiction of empowering, female-centric, pro-LGBTQ messages meant for children. But the truth is that Steven Universe notoriously struggled with a very stilted, awkward release schedule that came out in the wake of, you guessed it, a regressive internet backlash spearheaded by homophobic fundamentalist groups like Focus on the Family that successfully pressured Cartoon Network into putting a near suffocating stranglehold on the release schedule of new episodes of the series. Let's take a look at a couple of clips from the last episode of the first season of Steven Universe, seemingly the moment that got Cartoon Network to begin interfering with the series' originally normal release schedule, in which we learn that one of the main characters is actually the physical manifestation of a lesbian relationship and has been that all along. Let's take a look.
Amethyst? Pearl? Garnet! Where are they? Whoa. Ew. Cool. I'm out. Woohoo! Okay, where is everybody? Gotta find him, gotta find him, gotta find... Oh! Hello? Are you okay?
Great! This is just perfect!
Do you need any help?
No! I mean, don't look at me! Just go away.
What?
Hey, wait! You're out! How did you get past the field?
Oh, I just kinda...
Wait, no, wait! It's okay? What's going on?
Somebody's singing.
Sapphire. Let me out of here! Please! I need to find Sapphire!
Is she your friend? I'm looking for my friends too.
She's all alone! I need to find her!
Don't worry, we'll find our friends. And we'll do it together! Well, wait for me! Hey, my name's Steven, by the way. What's yours?
Quiet! I can't see. This way!
How many more gems are trapped here?
Don't know, don't care. She stopped singing. Sapphire! Oh, it's just you.
Lapis! Lapis, I can get you out.
Stop!
It's okay, I can...
No! I don't want your help. Things are bad enough as it is. I've already made too much trouble. Once we get back to Homeworld, they're going to decide what to do with us.
I don't have time for this!
Wait!
Steven, whatever you're doing, just stop. If we do everything they say, they might go easy on us.
But they're... mean. They hurt my friends. They hurt my face. They've got you here in prison.
That's why we can't fight them.
That's why we have to fight them. I'll come back for you.
We can't leave yet! The whole point of coming here was to check on the cluster.
Stop singing! Rose Quartz takes priority. Get back to the bridge and set a course for Homeworld.
Go to Earth, they said. It'll be easy, they said.
Hey, I like your song. Are you Sapphire?
You escaped. Of course.
Come on, it's safe.
Thank you, Steven.
You're welcome.
Come on.
Whoa!
hurt you? No, I'm okay. Did they hurt you? Who cares? I do.
Steven! Thank you.
Garnet! You're a fusion?
Oh, I'm sorry. We didn't want you meeting us here like this.
Well, did I make a good first impression?
Oh, Steven, we already love you.
Where is she?
It's Jasper. Steven, find the others and get to the control bridge.
But I don't know where they are. Future vision. Wait, are you gonna be able to beat her on your own?
It's okay, Steven. I'm never alone.
Fusion is just a cheap tactic to make weak gems stronger. Quit embarrassing yourselves. I've seen what you really are.
No, you haven't. This is Garnet, back together. And I'm never going down at the hands of the likes of you because I'm so much better. And every part of me is saying, go get her. The two of us ain't gonna follow your rules. Come at me without any of your fancy tools. Let's go, just me and you. Let's go, just 1 on 2. Go ahead and try, hit me if you're able. Can't you see that my relationship is stable? I can see you hate the way we intermingle, but I think you're just mad cause you're single. And you're not gonna stop what we made together. We are gonna stay like this forever. If you break us apart, we'll just come make you up. And we'll always be twice the gem that you are. I am a
Okay, ship, turn us around.
This is who we are. This is who I am. And if you think you can stop me, then you need to think again. Because I am a feeling, and I will never end. And I won't let you hurt my planet. I won't let you hurt my friends. Go ahead and try, hit me if you're able. Can't you see that my relationship is stable? I know you think I'm not something you're afraid of, cause you think that you've seen what I'm made of. But I am even more than the two of them. Everything they care about is what I am. I am their fury, I am their patience, I am a conversation. I am a and it's stronger than you. And it's stronger than you.
Garnet!
This ship is going down.
What about Lapis?
There's no time. And it's stronger than you.
Steven Universe series creator Rebecca Sugar has famously discussed how her own status as a bisexual, non-binary woman has influenced her work and the pain she felt upon learning that, according to rather regressive FCC guidelines regulating depictions in children's broadcast television, a mere discussion of the existence of non-cisgendered heterosexual characters would automatically violate a TVG rating in a children's show by FCC standards. Horrified by the idea that she herself, existing as a person, could not physically, exist or be portrayed as a rated TVG character under current definitions, Rebecca Sugar challenged this notion throughout the run of Steven Universe, which, while subjected to a stifling release schedule by Cartoon Network, was nevertheless eventually completed, very well received, and continues to have an enormous fan following to this day. Now, as we discussed before, of course, one way for children's media to avoid FCC standards is to simply be distributed on the relatively unregulated new platform of online streaming services, which brings me back to a discussion of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. She-Ra avoids FCC censorship of pro-LGBTQ content in children's media the same way it avoids FCC rules against the half-hour toy commercial, which it arguably also totally is. She-Ra, if anything, ultimately pushes the envelope even further than Steven Universe, depicting not only multiple coded, quiet, but certainly extant lesbian main characters, not only heroic characters of multiple races and skin tones, not only badass and relatable female main characters with a variety of different body types, but also the first openly non-binary kids cartoon show character, voiced by perhaps the first openly non-binary cartoon voice actor, Jacob Tobiah. Let's take a look.
Hi, I'm Jacob Tobiah, and I am so excited to announce that I'll be joining the cast of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power for Season 4. I play a character called Double Trouble, who is a non-binary shape-shifting mercenary, so functionally I'm playing myself.
Ta-da! Thank you. Thank you.
Fantasy has always been so vital to me because as a non-binary person, it's a way of escaping the confines of the world we live in, right? It's the way of building other realities and imagining the world as it could be, not as it is. Having non-binary representation in animated shows for young folks is just so vital because young people today are already understanding that gender is diverse and a broad spectrum from a super early age, right? So it's about time that the shows that we're making for young people reflect the world as they understand it. I'm excited for everybody to see Double Trouble live up to their namesake.
Now, fun fact about Double Trouble. I love this character. I actually identify with their gender much more strongly than basically any character I've ever seen portrayed in any other media in my entire life. Maybe I lean a little more female than they do, but not that much. This is a groundbreaking and really important thing that you just never see. And now we're beginning to see it, and that's a great thing. I have this story of, I was recently at a friend's wedding, well, a few months back when we had social gatherings, and I, when I go to weddings, I dress femme, I wear the dress and I put on makeup and blah 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 because it's a formal event and people expect it. And I was out there on the dance floor and I had this anarchistic thought popped into my mind, ha ha ha, they don't know that you're really a shapeshifter with no gender, ha ha ha, you're Double Trouble. And I just felt great and I threw my head back and laughed and I had a fabulous time. And I think that, I wonder in a sort of Aaron Ramsey kind of way, the why should I go see it author, how would my life have been different had I seen this as a child? This is a really important thing. And even though there is, of course, some fair criticism of the show that, for example, Double Trouble is technically a villain character, I don't really have that much of a problem with that personally. I identify with them just as much anyway, and I would actually argue that they're more of a neutral character than a villain because, spoiler alert, they changed sides, but whatever. And that the lesbianism is coded and maybe not as forceful and upfront as some viewers would like, and I agree, but for what it's worth, it's not that hard to read into it and see what it's supposed to be. Female characters will say to each other, "You're my friend," instead of "I love you." And I think, at least from an adult perspective, but maybe also from a child perspective, it's clear that there's more going on there than that. And for what it's worth, even if this, isn't perfect, it's still groundbreaking, it's what we have now, and it's paving the way for better things to come. So I'm on board with it. Watch She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. The new season is coming up in a couple of weeks. I'm excited. Add it to your quarantine queue. So these portrayals are powerful, they are empowering, and what I love perhaps most about the Netflix She-Ra show is how completely unapologetic it is about what it stands for, and how supportive the Netflix streaming platform has been of this content, unlike Cartoon Network's, I think, rather cowardly treatment of Steven Universe, basically trying to kill it by releasing it in such a gradual, piecemeal fashion. And then again, even with that attempt, they failed and there's still a huge fan following. So where does this leave us now? Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways here is that the internet is very much a double-edged sword. simultaneously empowering female and minority voices while also giving a platform to regressive, hateful backlash, simultaneously bringing us closer than we ever were before, at least since the concept of post-agricultural patriarchy, to recognizing each other's shared humanity and value, and yet polarizing us away from each other through online vitriol, manipulated echo chambers, and platforms, on social media that foster extremist content. The amount of regressive backlash against progressive media remains, I think, a fascinating subject of study. This type of reaction from male audiences was simply never recorded from any past era, at least not as far as I am aware. There was no known reaction to compare, say, to the serial queen melodrama. There was no huge male backlash against it that we have records of, to my knowledge. And if it did happen, if it's not preserved, we can't know about it. Which invites the question, if it didn't exist, is today's culture therefore technically more regressive than the culture of the early 1910s? In a way it might be. I think that to a certain extent, this narrative that we give women that says that, oh, you should feel so lucky to be living in the time that you're living in because women in the past had it so much worse than you, I think is maybe in part a false narrative meant to control us. On the other hand, it's also certainly true that to a large political extent, we certainly have it better now than we did in the 1910s. I think, yet again, this has to do with the inverse relationship between women's political power and women's depictions in media. The earliest height of depictions of female empowerment through the serial queen melodrama came out of a time when women did not yet have the right to vote. And I think very significantly, once they had the right to vote, that very same year in 1920, 1920 just so happens to be the year that women were unilaterally kicked out of the profession of film directing, purged out and pink-slipped en masse by male Hollywood studio heads. It seems rather as though female power was suddenly perceived as a serious threat once women had the right to vote. Similarly, after events in World War II had empowered women to the point at which they, had learned that they could do literally any job traditionally reserved for men, a massive campaign of regressive gaslighting via filmic and especially televised portrayal of the housewife successfully counteracted the narrative of female power in order to keep the imbalanced patriarchy alive and trick women into accepting that their place was in the home rather than in the workforce or the public sphere. Similarly, again, just in time for the advent of second-wave feminism, the legalization of birth control, abortion, and the pill, we see a massively regressive backlash throughout the 60s and 70s via the hypersexualization of women in film for the first time and the advent of the gender nudity bias, the rape-revenge genre, slasher flicks, and a sharp increase all of a sudden in graphic depictions of female rape in film. In the early 2000s, when we finally came into a world where, for the first time, a woman ran a real serious chance of being elected president, or at least so we thought, sorry Hillary, we start to see perhaps the most regressive wave of anti-female portrayals so far through post-feminist narratives pervading American culture, building on the regression of the past, and of course the rather devious and highly cynical strategy of manipulating women into looking down on feminists and even encouraging women to be sexist themselves. It's interesting how things have now changed, basically, where we begin to see more progressive filmic portrayals of women than ever before in modern filmic history, with a separate backlash taking place not so much in mainstream film, but on the separate platform of the internet, a currently unregulated Wild West of a place whose high engagement-oriented algorithms have finally begun to be questioned by cultural critics and computer programmers alike, many of whom are beginning to argue for a pro-social engagement-oriented algorithm so as to fight against extremism, help keep elections more secure, and make sure that healthful, helpful, factual and positive messages rather than outrage-inducing lies are the things most amplified by the algorithms on these platforms. We aren't there yet, but we're getting there. Ironically, for all the pain and death and trauma that it has already caused us, the coronavirus is actually a significant factor currently accelerating progressive change and adding fuel to the fire of cultural progress, encouraging new masses of people to question the regressive systems that our nation has so long taken for granted, to realize that our hierarchies benefit the very few at the expense of the very many, and to understand with grim gravity, perhaps for the first time, the real life and death results of this unfair allotment of privilege. Patriarchy, racial hierarchies, and corporate oligarchies are, of course, all at the heart of these problems, as they have always been in this country. But with new tools of mass communication through the internet, the people are now more informed and hence more culturally enfranchised now more than ever. I think it's fair to interpret the extreme regressive backlash we are currently seeing through the present administration in the White House as a beast in its death throes, vainly scrambling to hold on to a fictive sense of past glory and racial/patriarchal security that, in fact, never really existed in the first place, and is, in a far more precarious situation now more than ever.
The more you tighten your grip, Tarkin, the more star systems will slip through your fingers.
So I leave you with this. Keep thinking and keep questioning the narratives that you see and hear coming out of mass media. When it comes to yourself and your gender, listen to your gut and your heart, not what anyone else tries to tell you you are or should be. You are you, and that is correct. If you can, spread the word of what you've learned here as everywhere else, and especially spread the word of what you believe in. It is through the sharing of information that we move forward and make progress as a species. Information is a technology. Share it in the service of the greater good. Keep the conversation going and spark new ideas and new conversations as you go along. I've read your assignments. I've seen the nuanced, brilliant thoughts that you guys seem to have all the time. You are all great thinkers, and collectively, you are, by far, the best class I have ever had in my entire teaching career thus far. I am so proud of you. I'm going to miss you guys a lot. So never hesitate to email me if and when you need anything, if you want an opinion or need someone to talk to, or if you just want a good suggestion for a film to watch during summer break in quarantine. If you're not going to graduate next month and are still going to be at FDU come the fall, I'm slated to teach a course on women behind the camera that promises to be a lot of fun, so who knows? Maybe I'll see you there. In the meantime, once again, the final exam will be available under the Assignments tab of Web Campus next week from 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. on Tuesday, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, so stay sober till you're done, and keep an eye out for it, as well as for an email from me alerting you to when it's live, and please don't hesitate to let me know if you have any further questions or concerns about the final or anything else. Once again, the final exam allots you 2.5 hours in which to take it. It should be plenty of time, should be way more time than you need. The final is cumulative, so brush up on the vocabulary and all those old notes. And as always, I wish you all the very best of luck with everything that you choose to pursue. Thank you all, once again, for being such an awesome class.
What do you go for? Go see a show for? Tell the truth, you go to see those beautiful dames. Yes, you spend your dough for bouquets that grow for all those cute and cunning young and beautiful dames. Oh, dames are temporary flames. To you, dames, you don't recall their names.